Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Jenna Quinn, and it's my pleasure as the Assistant Director for Alumni and Affinity Engagement to welcome you all to this edition of the 49er Industry Chat Series. Just so everyone is aware, this session is recorded. So what that really means for you is that it's going to be available for you on demand on our website at www.csulb.edu/alumni. So feel free to watch it again or share it with a friend or a colleague or anyone else you think might get something good out of it. And with that, I am so very happy to introduce our speaker today, Jack Horvath. Welcome, Jack.
Welcome.
Awesome. Well, let me just start off by reading your bio so that way folks can learn a little bit more about you before we get started.
That'll work.
So Jack began his law enforcement career as an officer with the Downey Police Department. After working there for approximately 5 years, he transferred to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office Bureau of Investigation, where he spent most of his career as a district attorney investigator. While employed there, he rose to the rank of captain. After retiring from Los Angeles County, Jack served as an assistant chief investigator with the Riverside County District Attorney's Office Bureau of Investigation, and as the fraud division chief with the California Department of Insurance. During his time as a district attorney investigator, he worked a variety of assignments and developed an expertise in white collar matters. Jack possesses a BS and an MS in criminal justice from the California State University in Long Beach. And he is also a graduate of the FBI National Academy and the California Post-Command College. Jack, that is one impressive bio and resume a mile long. So I'm excited for today. I'm excited for this chat. Thanks so much for being here.
Well, it's my pleasure, and hopefully we all get something out of it.
Yeah, I trust we will. Well, let's, with that, let's just start off. Let's, if you could share a little bit of background with me and, tell me about your life and your experiences that led you to CSULB in the first place.
Well, as you can tell, I've been around a little bit longer than most. So when I was coming out of high school, I had already determined that I wanted to be a police officer, and this would have been in the early 1970s. And basically, there was two colleges that offered a criminal justice major, or as it was called sometimes back then, police sciences. It was Cal State LA, or California State University at Long Beach. Long Beach was physically closer to where I lived, and it won the coin toss.
Nice. And good a reason as any, a coin toss. I love it, and I'm so glad that you did come here. But what was your student experience like when you were at CSULB? Were you involved in any clubs or activities, or did you have any professors or peers that really stuck out to you and made a difference here?
Well, my experience at Long Beach during the 70s, it was very much a commuter college back then, and there were very few students that were living on campus, and so you didn't have as much of an experience like the students do now, or at least is what I understand the students have now. I was working as well as going to college at the same time. I was actually working as a student worker at the Downey Police Department. So that was a 20-hour at least commitment during the school year. And I was going full-time college. So I was pretty busy, just with those two commitments. But I did have some great teachers, and it wasn't always just in the criminal justice discipline. One of my favorite teachers was a history professor there. And I actually thought about Dr. Hood, David Hood. And I actually considered taking a history minor, but when it come to shove, I decided to get out of college rather than doing that.
Well, I can imagine, and 20 hours a week time commitment at the Downey Police with Downey Police, while a full-time student, that is so much. How was juggling, being a working student and your studies?
Uh, they say if you're busy, you get more done. I think that was the case for me. I had to plan my days very judiciously. I mean, I was very fortunate. My work schedule made my college a priority, so I never had to worry about when I took classes. They knew if I was in class, that I wasn't available to work. And a police department's a 24/7 operation. So somehow I was able to work all of it together. But it was a good thing for me because it allowed me to work in an environment that I thought at that point that I was going to make a career out of. So as a student worker, if you will, or they call them police aides back then, I was working as a jailer. I was working as a dispatcher. I was working in the records. I worked in the evidence room. I worked in the photo labs. So I got a pretty diverse exposure to the potential of what the career would allow me if that's what I was really hard set on doing. And I'm glad I did it.
Well, I mean, it kind of sounds to me like you were heart set on it, right? You wanted to be a police officer, going in, right? So,
Right.
how was that decision? And how did you find that what you thought law enforcement would be kind of panned out with what it actually was?
Well, I always tell students, high school students, one of life's greatest irony is at 18, you're supposed to decide what you're going to want to do for the rest of your adult life, which is 40, 50 years, whatever it's going to be by the time they get around to retirement. And quite frankly, and this will kind of explain why I like the history so much, I thought when I was younger that I liked the excitement, and this was pre-Indiana Jones, that I wanted to be an archaeologist. And then I realized that that's not much of a career path for people because that's sounds good in the books, but it's very hard to make a living at. And I, by fluke, took a police science class in high school. And one of the things we were afforded was an opportunity to ride along with the local police department.
Mhm.
And I had the most exciting night of my life. We ended up having this incident that occurred, and literally a high tension wire dropped on our patrol car when we pulled somebody over, and it was, as you might expect, pretty exciting. And I go, wow, they get paid to do this, and this is their job. So that's when I decided that I was going to pursue a law enforcement career based on that one incident. Fast forward 5 or 6 years later, I was working with that same officer, and by then I realized that every night wasn't like that. And I go, hey, do you remember that night? And he goes, oh yeah, most exciting night in my career. And I start laughing. I go, well, I was your student ride along that night. So a fluke, but a good fluke for me.
And I think that a lot of folks are who want to pursue that field, right? Don't know whether or not, college is the right path for them. Is that still the case? And how did your studies at CSULB really prep you for your career path?
Okay. Uh, I'm sure there's many police departments where you can get hired with just a GED or high school equivalent. My generation and my family was the first generation that really had the opportunity to go to college. And I made a promise to my parents that I would go to college, and I did. Now, am I glad I did? Immensely so. College does several things for you. It widens your perspective. You don't want to have tunnel vision. And I think a lot of people who go right into the workforce, specifically policing, and don't have a wider, broader perspective, it does them a disservice sometimes because they only have one platform to look at life. On an economic front, not that we should talk about this, having a college degree gets you most departments. If you don't get extra money for having a bachelor's degree, it gets you more money sooner. The way they They devise their pay scale. There's, not to get hyper technical, but you get your post certificates, which are the state's standards and trainings, and you get those more rapidly if you have a college degree. So there is that big plus. And I tell people all the time, and I have my master's degree, as you noted, what the master's degree really did for me, two things. I was looking at promoting, and everybody in the level above me had it. And so I didn't want to have that not be an issue. But the master's degree really, really, really taught me how to write. And writing skills are, you never see police shows on TV where they spend lots of time writing. Trust me, you spend a lot of time writing. So if you write well and are comfortable writing, it makes your life so much more easy.
Yeah. No, I think that's important, right? Like, I think a lot of folks may not have had necessarily that right along experience to base
Right.
off of, but instead this culture and this of the media and cop shows and movies, and sitting at the desk and writing a report doesn't make for good TV, right?
No, no.
Well, so you had in your career in law enforcement alone, you had many career pivots, right? You went from working in the police department as a police officer to being an investigator. And then, after that, I guess staying with the investigation, but working with the district attorney's office versus the California Department of Insurance. I think a big question is, how do you know when you're ready, or when a career pivot or just a next move up is the right path? And how did you figure those out at the different junctures in your career? And what would be your advice to folks who are thinking of that?
So that's a question lots of people ask. It's like, when do I think about promotion? When do I think about a different part of, especially in law enforcement? And my advice is, if you're enjoying what you do, and you can live with the economics of it, because promotion, there's obviously more money, stay. Enjoying your job is paramount. I mean, if you're enjoying your job, you're going to do a good job. And if you're doing a good job, that makes life easier, not only for you personally, but for the citizens you're working with. For me, the decision was, do I want to stay in uniform patrol? And I had spent about 5 years, which in retrospect isn't that long, but it was long enough that I was fairly competent at the patrol officer function. I was very comfortable in the city that I was working. So it was a question, do I want to try to promote, or do I want to become a detective? And the way things were structured back then, you couldn't become a detective unless somebody transferred out. They were permanent slots, so that everybody was sitting in there until they retired. So that wasn't an option. And then, so I took my first sergeant's exam, which is first line supervisor in the patrol agency. And I was the only one under 30 on the list. And I was number 12. And this is an agency that would maybe have 1 or 2 openings every test cycle. So I go, oh my God, if nothing changes, I will be, and I'll use the term, pushing a patrol car until I'm 40. And I just couldn't see myself doing that. I mean, shift work is very demanding, and I had just recently married, and it's hard on the family life. Quite frankly, you hear folks say, you're the police officer, but everybody else goes along for the ride. And there's a lot of truth to that, because you're working holidays, birthdays, special events. You may or may not get off vacation when you want. I was looking for something that'll still allow me to be in law enforcement. And the district attorney's office provided me that opportunity.
No, I think those are, there are a lot, just highlights that there are a lot of considerations to make, whether that be stability or family or, finances. So yeah, no, I think that's Makes a lot of sense. Um, and in your job, right, in the role of investigator for the district attorney's office, I think there's that notion of like, what do you actually do, right? Is everything that high octane, chasing down those fraudsters or criminals or whoever they may be? What would a typical day in the position look like?
Well, so there's multiple levels of investigators. When you first get hired, it is pretty mundane stuff. Your first assignment will be to go out and find witnesses that have somehow got lost between the time they were a witness on the original crime when that case went to trial.
Mm.
So that meant that, and understand, I worked at a suburban police department. I'm now working downtown LA, and I'm in jurisdictions I've never worked before. And I'm literally looking for witnesses that are lost that are street people. So I'm looking for street drug dealers. I'm looking for prostitutes that are working. This is back in the 80s. They're working, they called them lines, but like Sunset Boulevard or whatever. I'm working what was then defined as Skid Row, looking for folks that had got misplaced or lost. And that was what I did for about a year. It's kind of paying your dues. And their philosophy when I was coming up was, you can't do an investigation if you can't find the witness you need to speak with. So by the time I was done with that assignment, if I couldn't find them, and this was before computers and before Google search and, all this stuff that are, guys that do the same job now go on Facebook and find folks, right? If I couldn't find them, they weren't going to be found. And I remember one case, I spent a year tracking this person down. They kept on continuing the case, and I eventually found them in jail in Tennessee. But so that was your day when you first start. Once you get promoted to what's now known as a senior investigator, that's the journey position. And that's where you do casework. And I can't even tell you, time doesn't allow me to. There are so many different units in the LA DA's office, and some of this is parroted by the other DA's office. There's pretty much a DA's office and an investigative bureau in every county in the state. So they all run a little bit differently, but a big function in LA is what they called pre-trial investigation. So a case needed some work after like LAPD worked on the case. It went through prelim, but the attorney working the case may need additional work. He can't go back to LAPD because they've moved on.
Mm.
DA investigator will find a witness, interview folks, do whatever needs to be done. There's specialized units, like I worked a lot of white collar crimes. So they would be real estate fraud, auto insurance, workers' comp insurance, real estate. Back then they used to do welfare fraud investigations. So those days you're spending a lot of time going through material. You're interviewing folks, you're going through documentation, you're writing, prepping search warrants, those sorts of things. The more active units, if you will, were depending on what the elected DA wants, they'll work in specialized units in tandem with other departments. When I left, we had somebody assigned to the U.S. Federal Marshals Task Force looking for people that are high value warrants and people have absconded. After 9/11, we had 10 investigators and 2 supervising our sergeants assigned to the Joint Terrorism Task Force that were embedded with the federal agencies and the local law enforcement that were trying to figure out how to combat, not only foreign terrorism, but domestic terrorism. And as far as I know, they still have that imprint. They have consumer fraud cases, which go out in this is a perfect job for some people, go out and shop to make sure that people are being treated fairly in the marketplace. I learned so much about fraudulent ways to market things. It was hysterical. Who knew that you could slack fill a bag of potato chips and that was not good? Uh,
Well, I just can't believe it. A mystery shopper with a badge.
yeah, well, that's what they did. I mean, they'd go out and they'd like a lot of things, and this is pretty common, unfortunately. A lot of markets will run ads, but they won't with but they don't change the codes on the computer. So when you check out, you think you're paying, let's say, $1, and you end up paying the non-sale price for $2. So if that's a common practice rather than a whoops, you could be civilly prosecuted by the district attorney's office. It's, the office was out to protect you not only just from murders and mayhem and all that good stuff, but that you got treated fairly in the marketplace, that you were treated fairly in the insurance markets. It's unbelievable the amount of things that the DA's office actually gets into.
Yeah, no, that's incredible. And I think that, it also kind of it shows that like it's so diverse, right? Like your
Right.
interest you can find if your interest is X, Y, or Z, there's probably a place for you if this is what
Yes.
you're interested in.
Yes. Very
Yeah.
much so.
Well, during your career, as an investigator from when you first started to, when you left or when you retired, there was a lot of technological advances, right? So
Huge.
to just for an understatement, right? Um, so how did your roles how did you see your role um evolving and advancing as new technologies came forward, and how were you able to keep up to date? Because I can only imagine that that's a trend that's going to keep it occurring and keep advancing.
I agree. So one of the things I jokingly talk about is I had about a 40-year active career where I was from the time I started as a patrol officer to the time I left. When I started patrol, I did not wear body armor, which is unheard of now. Think that 40 years ago, most peace officers did not have bulletproof vests. Now I laughed. I wouldn't go outside the door of my office without it on. It's just a different world. But concurrent with that, and I think to the point which you're alluding to, is the evolvement of computers. And I have an older brother who is an electrical engineer, and I remember I went with him one day to college, and they had to program the computer, a simple thing. And he spent 10 hours there, and I was, still in high school. I'm going, oh my God, this computer stuff, it's not for me. So when I was in undergrad, I never took any computer classes because it was still evolving. About 3 or 4 years after I got out of college, I go, oh my God, I need to understand what computers are about. So I went to a junior college and took basic computer classes just to enhance my skills. By the time I left, I didn't mention this earlier, that highly coveted positions are the people who do forensic computer analysis. And the DA's office has a section of trained investigators that deal with computer crimes and also do the forensic examination of computers. That's going to continue to be a big thing forward. I'm curious how they're going to deal with artificial intelligence, and how do you prosecute a machine that may be the underlying culprit. Uh, It'll be interesting. I'm sure they'll write books about it before that actually becomes reality, but I bet you it'll happen. The other thing that's caused a huge change, and it's something everybody appreciates now, is almost universally accepted, is body cameras on peace officers. Um, and I haven't talked about it, but I worked at one time on the prosecution of the officers involved in the Rodney King incident. And that was 1991, I guess, 1991. Yeah. So when that first came out, that was not by an officer's recorded device. It was a citizen who had a
Little
VHS
big
recorder.
clunky, yeah,
Yeah, something like,
cameras.
yeah, a shoulder mounted camera. And we started talking, this is early 1990, we go, you know, this is going to be a huge change for law enforcement moving forward, because up to then, if there were allegations of misconduct, it was one person's word against another's, and it was very hard to prove any misconduct. So with the advent of portable recording devices, and clearly officers wearing them now, and citizens using their cell phones. I mean, I was just watching a termination of a pursuit the other day, and there was 8 people around the police officers within 3 or 4 feet, all recording what the police officer was doing. And I'm going, it's completely changed. I think it's a good thing, because 99.9% of the things that I see police officers doing, peace officers doing, is the right thing. Sometimes the context is hard for non-practitioners to appreciate, but I think our law enforcement does a pretty good job. And I think the cameras are not a bad thing. And that's my personal opinion. Please don't attribute it to any agency I ever worked with.
No, no, that's great. And I mean, hey, that's what we're doing here, right? Like
Right.
getting your take on the industry trends. But another aspect of this with any industry, but I'm particularly curious for the law enforcement and investigative industry. How important is mentorship and networking in that industry, in your line of work?
I think it's important. As in all industries, personal relationships come into play. And I alluded to it earlier that sometimes police officers tend to mentor each other more than have external relationships. And sometimes that, in my view, once again, my personal view, that works to their disservice, because they no longer have a normalized picture of the world. They think that it's our way or the highway sometimes. And I understand why that happens, because they're under strict guidelines on what activities they can and cannot do. And they work weird shifts. So the only ones that have shifts similar to them and that they can go out and have social time with are fellow peace officers. But it tends to sometimes dement their perspective, and you'll hear oftentimes that it's them against us, which it shouldn't be, and it isn't. Or sometimes you'll hear the blue curtain or the cone of silence among peace officers. I don't think that is as prevalent now as it was when I was coming up. I think that has changed for the better, and I continue to hope that that will continue to improve.
That's great. I hopes for the future. For
Yes.
sure, for sure. So, in your experience, and this can be from uh, any position that you had or every position that you had, but I have kind of a two-parter question, which is, first, what is the most challenging part of your job?
Uh, this kind of dovetails into what I was just talking about. I think peer pressure.
Mm.
And I think any of your students that are studying law enforcement read headlines, as I continue to do. And I don't work for these agencies, so I don't know for sure what's happening, but you hear discussions about internal cliques, gangs, or whatever within departments. That's purely driven by peer pressure. Um, there's another type of peer pressure, and this is one that most people don't think about. There's a peer pressure to perform at minimum levels, like don't do too much work or you make the rest of us look bad. And that can be just as pervasive. So I think peer pressures is fairly significant even now. I mean, clearly, if you talk to people working on the field now, they'll talk about the demands of their job versus they're subject to a lot of complaints or whatever. And that's probably true. I mean, historically, what I dealt with in the 70s is far different than what patrol officers feel and deal with now. But peer pressure, no matter what agency I was with, and this is as current as 4 years ago, peer pressure is hugely out there.
Okay, yeah, no, and I think that that would be, across all the jobs, right? Just in
Yep.
general. Yeah, okay. What
Nobody wants to talk about it though, right?
well, I mean, I think that just by the very nature of it, right? Like you wouldn't want to talk about it because that's kind of, you talk about it, then everybody knows about it.
Right, exactly. It's tough.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's law enforcement specific, like you
Mhm.
suggested. It's in every workplace,
Yeah.
and it's the day-to-day stuff. It's dealing with people, not only people as the citizens you're dealing with, or your suspects or witnesses. It's dealing with each other, and to have a harmonious workplace, you have to figure it out.
Yeah. No, for sure. And again, I think that's something that can apply to all industries, but particularly in one where you have both those interfaces with the sworn peace officers, right? And
Right,
having common ground, and also the general public,
right.
which I will get back to in a second. But I want to ask the second part of the question, which is, what is the most rewarding part of your job?
When everything was done right. And for me, there's different levels. I had different rewards. When I was a supervisor, I was watching the development of my staff. When I was in upper management, when I was able to help pivot an organization from point A when it needed to be to point B and helping it get there on an individual case level, like when I was a patrol officer. Make Patrol officers are kind of interesting. You see immediate rewards when things happen. You go in there, you quell whatever the problem is. You go, God, that was neat. I made an impact. As you go up in an organization, it's a little bit time delayed. Uh, Developing staff, mentoring, um, making a better organization. That was, I think, the things I found most rewarding.
Oh yeah, no, that's awesome. And it's great to hear. Um, Circling back, there is that dichotomy of interacting both with, the other sworn peace officers and also with the general public, because I think, crime and issues and things that need to get investigated, right? That's not any one like that's everybody, right?
Right.
There's not one particular um type or group of people that you would be relating to. It truly is the general public. So how did, how was that relationally, how was that practically, and how did that work out functionally, having to be in a position where you're truly dealing with people from all walks of life?
Yeah, I don't remember where I heard it, and it may have even been in my academy class. One of the best pieces of advice I ever had was know a little bit about everything,
Mm.
because whether it's sports or history or whatever, because if you just go in and this may be something people don't remember, dragnet, just the facts, ma'am, you're not going to get a good picture of what happened or get a good rapport. So what I would like you to do is start talking about something else if time allowed me. I mean, certain emergent situations you just had to get to the facts, ma'am. But if interviewing people, you always wanted to make it, or at least I tried to make it, a conversation rather than an interrogation. And
Mm.
even if it was a suspect, if I could find some common point to talk to him about other than the issue at hand, it was a better, much better interaction. Sometimes they would tell me, most times not, because these white collar criminals are not stupid. They're not going to, but if I could get them to at least pin a statement down, if I could disprove it, I was okay with that. Then I could go, okay, this is what he said happened or she said happened, and I can prove that didn't. So you make your own conclusions. So being able to talk about a wide variety of things. Now, going out in the social settings, if somebody finds your peace officer, that's the first thing they want to talk about. But you know, there's so much in life to talk about other than work. And I think if you learn to do that, you'll be healthier at work and out of work.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And for folks who are really concerned about the realities of work-life balance, in being an investigator, being in law enforcement, how did you personally navigate that and make sure that there was how did that balance out, I guess?
Sometimes well, not sometimes not so well. I
Were
was
there any like strategies or anything that you put in place that you found worked for you?
well, I had an hour commute both ways, so the hour home usually allowed me to vent and get that out of my system. So by the time I got home, I was dealing with children, and I remembered once somebody called up and asked at the home, and my teenage son answered the phone, and he starts laughing. He goes, "Somebody wants Captain Horvath," and he goes, "Yeah, I was just dad to him." And so talk about somebody putting you in the place right away. It's your children, so you have to decide what's important. And you know, I appreciate everything that career allowed me and my family to do. And I won't minimize how important that was, but my kids are important, my family's important. And so I tried to, when I was at home, when I could, devote my time there. I mean, there was times when I was working 20 hours a day and I was kind of absent, and that's just the way it is.
But you do the best you can, I guess.
You did. And, family, like I said, they're along for the ride too, and they reap the benefits. And some of the times it's just, you know, I couldn't be where I needed to be for them because I had to take care of the other part of them, which was, you know, being some of the economics in the household.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, working for a district attorney's office, right? You yourself had that job, you had that position, but the district attorneys themselves are an elected position.
Correct.
So how did you navigate, or how was the experience of working somewhere where politics is necessarily part of the job, or at least it's around the job, right?
Right. And that's true. And no matter who the elected DA is, from our current one to I started in 1980. So I think I worked for 5 or 6 elected district attorneys. Um, my tact was to stay neutral.
Mhm.
And what would happen, certain elected DAs would start in the office and there would be programs that they wanted to initiate. Like environmental crimes came into being under one DA because that was something that was important to him. Consumer fraud, similarly, you can look at some of the specialized units and they were something that were important to that elected. So even the current office, I'm told, has some units that were created because of the newly elected, or he's not newly, but he's been there almost 4 years now, that were important to him. And usually there's an investigative branch to whatever the new unit is. And that's exciting because you're usually creating new strategies for new fields.
Yeah. Well, I can imagine that, staying neutral is probably the best advice, right?
Right.
You never know, I guess, how the election is going to play out. So, yeah, no, that sounds
Yeah,
good.
the most traumatic ones were when there would be in-house candidates running against the sitting DA.
Oh man.
Yeah, so there would be camps, and I always laugh. They go, "Well, how do you stay neutral?" I go, "I'm so neutral, I'm registered undeclared." So, so I mean, you just have to be. You can't. It's the same system. It's the same justice system you're working for, no matter who the elected DA is.
Okay. So for folks who maybe who are considering, joining this career path, um, are there any pieces of advice for people who are just now starting or just now trying to get their foot in the door? Are there any pieces of advice that you'd give them, or trends that you think that they should particularly be paying attention to?
Right. So a couple things that I would constantly get asked is a lot of people like the thought of working in a law enforcement environment, but they don't want to work in a patrol agency. And I get that. And I spent a short time, relatively only about 5 years. So to those folks, I go, if you really don't want to work patrol agency, you're going to have to look at specialized investigative agencies. The state of California has all these regulatory agencies. If there's a regulatory agency, I almost guarantee there'll be a investigative component assigned to it, whether it is horse racing board, Department of Insurance, like I worked for. They actually had both sworn, which are officers that carry guns, and non-sworn investigators. So if you don't want to be work in an environment where you have to be a gun carrying peace officer, there's those agencies. Horse racing board, fair political practices, Department of Justice, uh, Lottery Commission has invested. There's tons of these agencies that exist in the state model. If you're interested in becoming a DA investigator, I just looked up to reaffirm that I had this right. I think in LA to start, you have to have at least an AA degree or above. They want you to have your basic post certificate, which just means you went through a police academy and have been a peace officer for at least a year. And they want you to have 2 years experience as a full peace officer in the state of California or their federal agency equivalent. So if in the Riverside where I worked there, they would only take detectives. So different agencies have different thresholds. But my advice is what you're doing in college matters. I was a hiring authority, and it always cracked me up to see guys that were criminal justice majors in college, and they were arrested. It's like, folks, you're going to have a background done on you. If you get arrested for drunk driving, that's going to make it hard for you to get hired. And believe me, that social use of cocaine is not a good thing when you go have your background done. A lot of agencies do polygraph exam, so you're not going to, well, there was only one other person that saw it. Well, that's not going to cut it. So make sure that if that's something you're studying to be now, keep your record pristine because it does matter. And if you don't get caught, a background investigator and polygraph will probably pick it up later. So that's like uniformly the one big thing I see a mistake. The other thing is uh, you have to pass a peace officer physical. And a lot of people, and I know this can be expensive, but rather than invest your whole education in a field, try to get a physical done to see if you can go online and get the minimums from peace officer standing and training post in California. Make sure you can pass that physical, that you don't have like a hearing defect or something's messed up with your heart that you don't know about that would preclude you from getting hired. So those are kind of the two big things that you can do proactively to make your life easier moving forward.
Awesome. No, that's great. That's great advice. And I think that's something that everyone can do, right? And make sure that they're not going down a path that may not be available to them.
That's 100% correct.
Awesome. Well, if you can believe it, that is time. I think that these 45 minutes have just absolutely flown by. So I want to say thank you so much, Jack, for being here today, and for sharing your career journey with us and your expertise. But I also want to say thank you to all of you who've tuned in and have joined us here for this edition of the 49er Industry Chats. I want to remind you guys that this is recorded, so you can watch it again, you can send it to a friend or a colleague, and you can do so on our website at www.csulb.edu/alumni. And you can also follow us on social media. We're at CSULB Alumni on all the social media platforms. Please feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions about how you can get involved, and make sure that you follow us so that way you don't miss the next one. Jack, if folks wanted to ask any questions of you, you let me know that they can contact us over here at CSULB Alumni, and you'd be open to connecting with them. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. It'd be my pleasure.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Jack, so much, and thank you all. Have a great day, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.